Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the International Spy Museum. I'm Amanda Olke, Adult Education Director here. I am delighted to see you here for Everyday Informants. We are really pleased to partner with the New York Times, and I think we're going to have a great conversation tonight, and it will be a conversation. We've got an incredible group of discussants, but you'll also have a chance to ask them questions and be involved, and we really look forward to that. I have a really exciting task. I'm to tell you to turn off your phones, or just silence them. You don't have to turn them off. I know you need to be live tweeting the whole time. We expect no less. Anyway, it is my pleasure to introduce a really great partner, Beth Weinstein, who's been so much fun to work with, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the evening.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Beth Weinstein, and I develop events for our subscribers. The goal is to bring you closer to the New York Times, to our projects like VR, our podcasts, to our columns like The Best of Late Night, and to our newsroom, members of which you'll get to hear tonight. This is just one of a larger portfolio. We were here in April at the museum. We did an after-hours tour at the Museum of African American History, and we plan to come back regularly over the next couple months, so I hope to see you all in the future. We're thrilled to be here tonight at the International Spy Museum. This wouldn't have happened without Amanda Olke and Afua Anokwa, who we're incredibly grateful to be working with. I'm proud to introduce you to Amy Fiscus, who will moderate. She is our national security editor. Prior to coming to the Times, she was the Washington bureau chief overseeing the White House for the LA Times. And it's my privilege to introduce them. Here they are.
Make sure, does this work? Hi, can you guys hear me? All right, welcome. Like Beth said, I'm Amy. I will be the moderator tonight. I'm hoping we're going to have a fun discussion, and we will have lots of times for questions afterward, unless, of course, one of the Trump children decides to release some emails, and then Glenn and I may have to run back to the newsroom, but that shouldn't be a problem. To my immediate left here, we have Peter Earnest. He's the founding director of the International Spy Museum and a 35-year veteran of the CIA, where he held many roles, including case officer in the clandestine service, primarily in Europe and the Middle East. And next to Peter is Runa Sandvik, a colleague of mine at the New York Times, the director of information security. Her primary focus over the past year has been helping reporters to better understand the challenges they face. And on the end, we have my Washington Bureau colleague, Glenn Thrush. He is a White House reporter for the Times, and prior to his tenure at the Times, he was the chief political correspondent at Politico. So welcome to them and to all of you. Thank you. So I would like to get started. Of course, you know, we all have been, experiencing everything that's been happening over the past 6 months, the past 2 years, really, and I think we can say pretty safely that we're living in some pretty extraordinary times, not just in terms of the politics of it, but certainly in terms of journalism. And the reason you're all here is to hear about leakers and unnamed sources and people who are trying to feed things to the media. But I think we would be best to start off with a little bit of context. And Peter, I'd like to ask you if you can talk about how things have changed and what you were seeing that's the most different from when you were in the field, when you were working at the CIA, really at the height of the Cold War.
Well, keep in mind you mentioned that I was in the clandestine service, which I was for about 25 years. But I was also with the Inspector General, and then I was our liaison with the U.S. Senate, and then I was spokesman for the agency for 3 directors. So in that latter part of my career, I dealt very much with the national security media here in Washington, and it's some of them are still around, quite remarkably, yes. But it's just remarkable. The thing is, the news cycle now is 24/7, so it's very hard for everybody. I think the major difference, of course, is the internet, and I think it's just cyber. It's the internet. It's the speed of the news. When things hit me in the agency as a story, or somebody would come up and say, I'm onto this and so forth, and I would have to scramble, I frankly don't know what I would do today. I think I'd go out of my mind. because not just because of that news cycle, but it is the pace of it and the nature of it. So much that is coming out now is, it bears on intelligence or bears on, quote, leaks. So I think the pace of the news cycle and the pace of the information that's coming out that certainly people like me would have to deal with as spokespeople is really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Runa, your entire job pretty much exists because of the internet. I mean, Runa is, the Times is one of two organizations that has a security specialist dedicated to the newsroom. The other one is The Intercept, the national security news site. Can you talk a little bit, it's such a unique role. Can you just talk a little bit about what you do and what you've done to sort of change the newsroom?
Sure. So the role was created to ensure that the security team had a presence in the newsroom. So most media companies do have a security team, but we now also have a presence in the newsroom. So that means that we help with specific stories. We helped set up the tips channel last year in December. We help reporters prepare for specific projects, specific trips, if they're communicating with a source and they want to know how to best do that, if they're about to receive a lot of documents and wonder if they're safe to open or how to best store them, report on them, things like that. We help with all of those things.
Yeah, so the tips channel, just to fill you guys in, is, you sort of see this as a thing on news websites. If you have any tips, you can give them to us securely and so on and so forth, and that's what we're going to help create. So people really can give us information without us, having to know who they are, protecting their identity. Glenn, you, of course, are at the center of everything that's going on right now at the at the White House.
I'm tired.
Glenn just got back last night, I think, from covering the president last week in Warsaw and Hamburg. So yeah.
I should have stayed for Paris.
No, we need you back here to do some more work.
I was not of that opinion, but continue.
Yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about, as far as sourcing, and have you noticed any sort of uptick in people trying to give you information that seems extra suspicious, or people popping up out of the woodwork? Talk about that a little bit.
It is a very odd environment that I'm in. Just a quick background. I never thought I would be in Washington. I never wanted to be in Washington. I'm a New Yorker. I worked for a couple of tabloids. I covered New York City Hall. I did a lot of investigative journalism in New York City. I've written. My first job was covering low-income housing in New York and slumlords, where they'd come after you with dogs, and things like the Staten Island ferry crash in 2003, the nepotism and mismanagement that led to that. That was a very different kind of. This was a little bit of the pre-internet age. The tips came from people calling you at 2 o'clock in the morning, and in one case, somebody knocking on my door. A very, very different environment. What's going on right now is entirely, I think, entirely a creation of the acceleration of technology and the acceleration of distrust, both sort of moving at warp speed. So what you have now is an environment, I think, which is, for reporters, that is starting to become eerily reminiscent of the sort of environment that you operated in, where you have to be much more careful about where you get the information and even understanding whether or not it is accurate. So I'll give you just two quick little examples. And I'm not going to get into the specific story, but there was an issue recently where a group of reporters and editors reported a story that turned out not to be true, and they lost their jobs as a result of this. In the aftermath of this, I must have gotten 6 or 7 phone calls from people I consider to be sources, asking me quite seriously if these reporters and editors were fed this information fallaciously and maliciously in order to get them fired. this is not the kind of, I don't know what the answer is, I presume not at the moment, but this is the sort of environment that we are dealing with. And the other thing, principally, I'm less of a national security reporter, though I sometimes do that, and principally a political reporter and sort of a presidential reporter. And I work oftentimes with partners, most often Maggie Haberman, who's one of my best friends, who is, by the way, a terrible flyer and is now on Air Force One, white-knuckling it over to Paris. I'm getting emails from her, by the way. So if I have to leave momentarily, it's to electronically hold her hand. But the process that we use, I'm going on a little too long here, but the process that we use is we essentially Rashomon it. So we will, this is something I'd never done before, and I've always worked with partners. We will re-interview. Usually back in the day, you tried to avoid interviewing the same people on the same story. It's like you don't want to wear your sources out. Now you seek that out. We will talk to the same people to make sure that their stories haven't changed.
Do they know what you're up to?
Well, we tell them. Yeah. I mean, and you'd be surprised at what you thought. There have been several times in the last couple of months where we thought we had an anecdote or a scoop nailed down, and it turned out not to be true.
You think maliciously?
No, I don't think maliciously, but we are in an environment for whatever reason, and I don't want to sort of get into the personalities involved here, where the truth, shall we say, the constraints upon people passing misinformation are looser than they have been for quite some time. And I think you just have an environment now that's pervaded with mistrust and people just shuttling a lot of stuff around.
Yeah, Peter, you certainly could speak to trying to figure out what's real and what's not. How do you do that?
Yes, that's been a perennial problem, what's real and what's not. It reminds me, listening to Glenn, when I responded to you before, I was responding as a spokesman. In other words, what's new as I watch the news coming at me. As a clandestine officer in the operations side, my job is essentially the same as Glenn's. We are looking for sources. And I used to say years ago, the difference between us and the media was we paid our sources. Well, I can't say that anymore.
It's still mostly a difference.
Yeah, mostly different. But the point is we had the same problem in that you have people coming at you who want to be in touch with intelligence and may have completely spurious information. The other thing, of course, that we had to deal with is what different intelligence services refer to as dangles. That is people who are deliberately run at you by the other side in the hopes that you'll bite and pick the individual up as a source, and then that becomes a double agent for them, for the other side, and then you are constantly wondering whether the source that you're running is really working for you or working for the other side. So it's not dissimilar from what you're dealing with, Glenn.
Can you tell us about a time when that went particularly poorly?
Well, it did. I had yes, I don't want to take up all the time, but I had one source that I felt
We've got time.
I felt was compromised and was working for someone else. We ran an operation against that source, in which literally I went to a soiree at the source's home wearing a bug, which at that time was a piece of wood about a foot and a half long with batteries and it was awful. This was under a tuxedo. I then, my wife, I said, would you talk to him now? It was a small group party. And so I said, just talk to him. I said, I'm going to go down to the restroom. That's where everybody assumed I went. I went down to his office, which I knew where it was. I got under his desk. I lay down there. I had a silent drill, drilled a hole, this Mission Impossible stuff. In his desk, there was a space where the drawer didn't go all the way. Placed the bug, which was here, up there, dusted the shavings off my tuxedo, and went back. And the next day we had a truck out there. This is Mission, with all the headphones and so forth and so on. And he was meeting with other people. So that's an example. I didn't.
Oh, come on, who hasn't done that?
You're probably not running bands and so forth against people.
Give us something new.
But really, we sometimes had to resort to things like that because of the nature of intelligence work. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great story.
Yeah, I don't think we've had to.
Yeah, I've got
We haven't had to go that far yet. I can say that.
I've taken people out for drinks.
We took a lot of people out for drinks, too.
Yeah, we had to run an operation on Glenn's Amex, but that's about as far as.
But I would say this, when you're dealing with people who are volunteering to you, as Glenn was describing, or as I will describe, many of our best sources in the Soviet Union were volunteers, not people that we had developed and cultivated and recruited. They had come to us at the risk of their lives. And our responsibility was to protect them. And in many cases, a number of cases, their motivation was not money, any kind of help. They so detested the regime that they were real leakers or whistleblowers in the noblest sense of the word. They were going to put it to the regime by giving the Americans the information. And that's a very powerful motivation that you're working with.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, you're talking about sort of those kinds of what now seem like, I guess, old-fashioned operations to some degree.
It's an old-fashioned operation.
Thank you. So, Runa, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what's, the sort of information gathering that is more prevalent now and what you're sort of teaching reporters to do to protect their conversations with their sources and sources' identities, and what you're seeing out there as far as malicious actors trying to figure out who reporters are talking to.
That's probably your bag.
I'll
anyone
leave
you know.
the information gathering up to the reporter in the room, but so we set up this tips channel in December last year, and it allows anyone to contact the New York Times through different secure channels like Signal, WhatsApp, encrypted email, secure drop is another option, or postal mail if you want to do that. Now, at that point, we do have someone who looks at all the tips that come in to sort of vet out, is it spam or does it seem legit? But at that point, we don't necessarily vet it. What we do is, for anything electronic, we clear out any embedded data in the file to ensure that there's no metadata. So if it does get passed around, there's not going to be any information associated with that document that tells you who the author is, for example. If there is any malware in the document as well, it's going to be stripped out at that point, so we're not passing that around the newsroom either. We do trainings with a lot of different bureaus to ensure that everyone knows why they should be using these different tools. So we try not to teach just that you should be doing these things, but also exactly why. Because to some extent it is up to the reporters to then teach this to sources and any potential sources. Yeah. Did you have a comment to that, or you sort of seemed like you wanted to add something? Okay.
It's just Glenn's nature.
Yeah.
Well, can you talk about a time when you have, perhaps in your sort of, you're sort of new to the world of journalism, can you talk about a time when you perhaps committed an act of journalism in this sort of hybrid job?
Committed an act
I'm
of
thinking
journalism.
I believe we've sort of, at least internally in the newsroom, there's a kind of famous story about Rukmini and
that one, okay.
ISIS.
So Rukmini Callimachi usually writes about ISIS and terrorism, and lately how different groups have been using these mobile apps and other tools to securely communicate with handlers. So Rukmini was working on a story about a group that had been arrested in India. They had a handler in Syria that they were communicating with using a couple of different ways to sort of encrypt email and chat and also calls. That group was arrested. One guy snitched on everyone else and said that they had uploaded this handwritten pledge to this file sharing site. So by finding the file sharing site, we were then able to actually locate the document that they had uploaded, and were able to include it in the article.
Wow.
Incredible. You don't have any stories like that?
No. This is terrifying me.
But certainly, Glenn, your job obviously presents enough of its own challenges. One thing I'm sort of wondering about is how you sort of navigate this for lack of a better word, this paradox that this administration presents, which is, on the one hand, it was a campaign tenet of the president's to, decry fake news, and that's something he still does. But on the other hand, you have a lot of people in this White House who are eager to talk to reporters. People, the mainstream of mainstreamiest media. What
A kindergarten class would be less leaky than this White House. They are compulsive talkers, and it all. The thing that I've kind of in the course of covering politics for these many years, that I've discovered is everything emanates from the top person. When I covered the Giuliani City Hall in New York, everybody, had that Giuliani scowl. People just kind of emulate the guy or the woman at the top of the food chain. And DC is more like that than any other place in the country, perhaps the world. Every decision, down to the bar menu across the street, is somehow derivative of Donald Trump at this point. It's just the nature of the way that the town works, right? And I think so. You have this duality, and again, not for nothing are a lot of the reporters who are currently covering Trump former New York City reporters. Donald Trump was I'm stealing this line. This was a colleague had mentioned this about the late, great Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, that he was unavoidable for comment, right? So before Trump ran for president, the last experience I had in communicating with him directly, and it took me a while to figure this out, were 2 unanswered phone messages that he left on my machine when I was in City Hall for Newsday, like the third or fourth newspaper of New York City. Some guy like me sitting there not wanting to talk to Donald Trump about his zoning mishugas on the west side of Manhattan. And Trump was a well-known source for everybody, calling everybody up off the record. The famous story about Trump is that he leaked news of his divorce, apparently, to Marla Maples, to one of the tabloids before Marla Maples had gotten the papers. So, Donald Trump is a guy who has been talking with tabloids and talking with reporters for an awfully long time. So when you hear him do this shtick, and I think it is to some extent shtick, though as time goes on and as these stories are reported, very tough stories, a lot done by us, a lot done by the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, he is becoming embittered with the press, in part because the Washington press plays for real keeps as opposed to the tabs, which back in New York, which is kind of slapping each other around like a Marx Brothers movie. I think, so this duality that he has of railing against the press in public and having different private relationships is one that he feels most comfortable with. It's going to be really interesting to see as these stories aggregate and as this comfort level we have seen deteriorates, how vicious this is going to get, and I think it is moving in that direction rather quickly.
We had a colleague of ours, Mark Leibovich, who is just a fantastic writer and has the cover in the Sunday Times Magazine, which I encourage you all to go out and buy. Thank you. He just did a big story about the stories about the president, and he had sort of a moment in there about how they met briefly, and he sort of complained about the fake news and the Times had been tough on him, and then what really caught my eye was that Mark said, but he did this this perfectly pleasant tone of voice.
I remember an instant earlier this year where I was meeting somebody in the West Wing, and you see Trump, and he says, "Yeah, your paper's fake news. That story you wrote about is lousy. And I heard you had a birthday. Happy birthday." C'est la guerre.
So, Peter, you obviously, in your time, sort of the end of your time at the CIA, when you were doing media relations, you obviously also had to create relationships with reporters. That's sort of at the heart of the job.
Yeah, we had a very high level of national security reporters. Some of whom are still up around, people like David Ignatius and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were here then, and that was a very fine caliber reporter. And so I regularly lunched and had drinks, as Glenn said, with reporters, as I did overseas. And I encouraged the people who worked for me because we were all in the same business. We were trying to understand what was going on in a country. Now, a reporter might be looking at a particular segment of the economy or looking at the leadership. The agency might be looking at the military and the threat to the United States or whatever. But we're all in the same business, and I always thought that the people in that business gained a lot by being in touch with one another. I felt the same way overseas. I felt the same way here.
Yeah, I mean, you know, at that time there was sort of also a big shifting world order, much like there is, you know, now. I mean,
well, there was. I was in the agency when the Soviet Union fell. It was interesting. I was there when the Soviet Union fell. Gates, one of the first things, Gates was then director before he became SecDef, he was director at the agency. And I was director of media relations. And so he gave me a videotape. When the Glomar Explorer, when the ship was raised, the Russian submarine, we recovered bodies of Russian sailors. And we accorded them a proper, as we understood it, a proper burial at sea by, I think, probably the Russian Orthodox rituals. And he flew to Moscow, the first director to do that, and took a copy with him. And he said, when I get to Moscow, he said, I'm going to call, you know, I'll get in touch with you, cable. We didn't call so much then. And he said, then give that to the news folks. And that, you know, it worked like a clock. And the news people were very interested in it. They were following, of course, the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, but let me give you the aftermath. In the months that followed, people looked around in the agency and elsewhere and said, so what's CIA going to do now? I mean, you know, and we really got worried when they stopped mowing the grass outside one of the areas of the building out at Langley. So, but enough threats evolved to provide plenty of work for intelligence people. But as you say, the world order changed quite literally. It was for me to watch the fall of the Soviet Union, which had been my whole life in the agency, was surreal.
you know, it's interesting you say people were sort of wondering what you guys were going to do. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, over the years, the sort of misconceptions that you've encountered that people have about spies and spying and what you've done to correct those?
Yes, we all have misconceptions about spying. And we start with that at the museum. If you go through the museum, you will find images from pop culture because that's how most people, so, you know, they read books and see movies and television and so forth. The question I'm asked as much as anything when I speak is, well, how about the movies? Is it like the movies? And my first answer always is, yes, it's just like the movies, you know. So, would that it were, everything would work. Mission impossible. But sure, that's why I think a museum like this, and we will be going to a new site at L'Enfant Plaza, bigger, more artifacts and so forth, a real theater, plays such a role because we're trying to enlighten people what is intelligence really about. When I was with Bob Gates, one of his keystone things was openness, and that was mine too. That became part of mine, you know, to help people understand how it really works. It doesn't mean giving away all the names of your sources, but it means trying to help people understand what's going on.
I have a question actually for both you and Runa. What has surprised you the most about working with journalists?
That's not for me.
Yeah, from when you were doing
I loved working with journalists. Oh yeah, they were among my favorite people. Yeah, no, they really like. Yeah, they're among my best friends. The relationships that I made endured long after I left the agency. I still meet with a group that was founded Bruce Van Voorst, if you knew Bruce Van Voorst. Yeah.
It's a good one.
Hygiene. Just starting out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been working with reporters for past 6 years, 7 years. So I think at this point, there's not a whole lot that I haven't seen. Early on, it was probably that reporters are even more impatient than I am. But yeah, no, at this point, it's sort of seeing it all.
Understandable.
Can I amend my remark? Yeah, okay. I think what drew me to journalism particularly was we do the same thing. That is, the people drawn to intelligence, the people drawn to in journalism are intensely curious. They want to know how things work. So it's a shared interest, really, in the world.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely true, and really important part of understanding, when people talk
Yeah,
about
if
sort
you're
of.
not interested, don't go into either profession.
Yeah,
Do
absolutely.
accounting. I'm sorry to all I apologize to any of the accountants.
Glenn, I'm hoping you have some firsthand experience with not only being the reporter on the story, but being the story. So last year when John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman's emails were stolen, a conversation that he had with Glenn over email, a very brief conversation, became public and was this created this one of many firestorms of last year. And so I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about what that happened.
I wasn't the only reporter
No, you
to have
weren't.
this happen to. I just want to, because there's safety in numbers, right? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the circumstances. I was in Topeka, Kansas, sitting across from Chris Kobach, who was at the time the Secretary of State, I guess he still is, Secretary of State in Kansas, interviewing him about voter fraud. And he had one of his aides sitting next to him, who was monitoring Twitter, as any self-respecting 27-year-old kid would be doing. And he said, "Glenn, there's some interesting stuff popping up on Twitter about you." And what had happened is, obviously, the Russians, Guccifer, had hacked Podesta's emails in kind of a perfect storm. Podesta had actually done that, who is, by his own admission, a senior citizen, hadn't actually fallen for a phishing expedition by Guccifer, but had misinterpreted, or actually the cybersecurity people in the Clinton campaign had misinterpreted his query and told him it was safe to open, and boom. My interaction with Podesta was pretty unusual. There were dozens of emails between myself and not dozens, but probably a couple of dozen emails between myself and Podesta. And Podesta's a laconic, mercurial, difficult character to deal with. He's somebody who's really close to the Clintons. When he talks, he talks. A cup of coffee that's supposed to be 15 minutes can turn into 3 hours, but when he doesn't talk, he really doesn't talk. And what had happened was I was working with another reporter who uncovered some conflict in the campaign on fundraising, and she had done a massive reporting, and I couldn't get Podesta on the phone. So what I did, because I was rushed for time, was I cut and pasted about a 5-paragraph section of the story that included a lot of her reporting that was unverified and could not have been used for publication. And to catch his eye, I wrote a very unfortunate intro, which was something like, I forgot what it was specifically, but I called myself self-deprecatingly a hack as a joke. I figured it would catch his eye, which it did. And he said, everything in this is fine. So what I was able to do was to take all the material that she had reported and kind of in the guise of fact-checking, because some of this stuff had been unverified, been able to get a very solid second source on all this in the chairman of the campaign. So I was able to essentially take that file, cut and paste it, send it to my collaborator, and boom, we had a story. Last I heard of it, I'm sitting in Chris Kobach's office. The kid shows me the email, and I had zero recollection of the entire thing, zero, except I knew that I was in some deep water when I saw it, because I knew immediately what had happened. And what had subsequently happened is interesting, is either Guccifer or some intermediary had a relationship with some of the publications that were kind of hostile. And so a lot of these stories were popping up on some conservative websites, and they were whipping that story. Up. So I tried to, my organization, I was at Politico at the time, was pretty supportive of me. I think they, as I had recognized, that it's not a good idea to send sections of the story to folks. Typically what we do is we send bulleted portions of it, and better still, transact it over the telephone. Though interestingly, over the course of the last few years, not surprisingly actually, sources have been much less. This is kind of a hidden battle I think folks who don't read the paper can fully understand. Our sources want to talk on the telephone less and want to transact on email more, because that gives them more control over their end of the transaction, because they're able to monitor your question and calibrate their answer. When I get somebody on the phone, I can get their locker combo out of them. Trust me, I've been doing this for a long time. So they tend not to want to talk to me on the phone. They'll try to do it on DM or on email. You know, I think newspapers and websites like Politico are developing more advanced protocols on this. And obviously, it was a searing experience. I remember one particular day where I had an alcoholic beverage at 10:30 in the morning to deal with the amount of incoming I was taking. But seriously, the larger issue here that I thought was really dangerous about this, and I think we are. The line between transparency and state surveillance is getting blurred, and I think this is a very dangerous moment we're in, and we have to think very carefully about it. But the main thing that I wanted out there, and I took a lot of heat on this, was to make the point that fact-checking and running material by sources is a fundamental part of our job. We should not be ashamed of it. Every story, and you can call up anyone I deal with in the Trump White House and ask them this question. Every story that I do that has a substantial component in it that's disputable, I try to present to them in as full a detail, both written or on the phone, as far in advance of publication of the story as possible. Not just to be a good guy, but because I get really nervous before a big story pops, because I don't want to get things wrong. So while it was an interesting personal experience, and it shed some light on what's going on right now, I think the fundamental takeaway that I hoped readers would get on that is fact-checking and discussing information with sources, even ones who perceive you as being hostile to them, is a fundamental part of our job, and we shouldn't, through WikiLeaks or anybody else, be scared away from doing it intensely.
I agree. I don't want to take up all of their time and be the only one asking questions, so I'd like to open it up to you all. We have a microphone. I will, and she's coming around, and we'll just communicate. And I would ask you when to hold the microphone close to your mouth, because this is being taped, so people can hear. Thank you.
And I will take it away if you go on too long. Is it on Memphis? Good.
Yeah, I have a question about, I was watching 2020 or something. It was about Watergate. And part of it was where Nixon railed on about how the press was liars, and essentially write 100 times on the board that the press was horrible. So it was interesting, because I didn't know it was that, he was that bad about it. But it seems the same, I mean, as I hear here with the Trump administration. But my question is, are the sources afraid to talk to you, or are they afraid to give you information? I know a previous talk is that they're leaking like sieves, but is there any fundamental fear of leaking like sieves, is my question.
Go ahead.
That's a complicated question. I think one of the unique characteristics of the Trump administration is how small the group of people who are quote-unquote Trump people is. I think Richard Nixon, having been in the Senate and been vice president and just being a general student of government, had control over the bureaucracy and seated it with people who were, even though he viewed himself as an outsider, and he viewed the Kennedys as conspiratorially turning Washington against him, he had a very sophisticated understanding of the mechanism of government and some element of control over most aspects of it. Trump is an inexperienced guy. He does not, by his own admission, have a lot of interest in government. So there is a smaller group of people who are directly loyal to him. Therefore, there are a tremendous number of people in the agencies, even in the West Wing, who are not directly tied to Donald Trump and therefore are more willing to speak. So Trump's estrangement, his newness, and by the way, this is a facet of his political character that got him elected. So it is not, I'm not saying this pejoratively, but Donald Trump, the fact that he is not part of this city and does not have a full understanding of the bureaucracy, I think that creates an issue where a lot of people are willing to talk. And then the other aspect of this, and I'm sorry to filibuster, but the other aspect of this is he essentially declared war on the intelligence services of this country during the campaign. And I can't speak to people's sources on this, but one would presume that that message was received.
You know, and I would speak, just speaking a little bit to that, the national security reporters I work with have spoken of extra difficulty with sources, if sources who are more elected to talk now, and it's not really because of any crackdown from the White House. I mean, it's the broader sort of environment we're living in right now with everything getting leaked and conversations being decontextualized and crackdowns at their own internal agencies. But, you know, and I think the sort of easier narrative that for people to put together is that it is because of, you know, Trump's feud with the intelligence agencies, but that's simply not the case. I mean, people tend to forget the Obama administration jailed more and went after more sources and prosecuted more sources than every single administration put together before that. So, I mean, that was a really legitimate crackdown.
Hi, thank you for doing this evening. I have sort of a two-part question. You were talking about verifying stories with subjects, and as yesterday, Junior's then put it out himself on Twitter. I'm wondering, has that happened before, or does it happen often, where subjects that you're verifying information with will either put it out themselves or give it to a competitor, but then also with respect to sources, not just subjects of articles, sources who may be talking to more than one reporter or talking to your competitors. How do you guys balance that?
Great question. Yeah, why don't I answer the first part, you answer the second part. Happens all the time. You know, one of the first times, I won't give away a name, but one of my first, when I started covering the White House in early 2011, and one of the first stories I had was a major person about to resign under pressure, right? And I went up to this person and I said, hey, I got this story. And this person said to me, oh man, don't go with it right now. Give me 20 minutes and I'll get back to you. And by the time I went back to my desk, it was the Washington Post had reported it. So that trick that he did is not a new trick.
No, I mean, obviously it happened yesterday, but it happened with us on something smaller a few weeks ago too. And it's kind of the risk you run, but it's a risk we have to take. I mean, fairness obviously is paramount. And I'm sorry, remind me what the second part of the question was?
Well, about sources and, you know, talking to more than one outlet or more than one reporter with the same information. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you verify that you're the only one who's got that scoop, or how do you balance that, and how do you figure that out, in addition to whether or not they may be telling you the truth or might have an ulterior motive?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's sort of a broad calculus. I mean, a lot of the relationship the reporters might have with the source and how much they could trust this person saying, oh, I only brought it to you, or sort of avoiding that topic altogether and becoming a little suspicious perhaps that they didn't. And but that's a big reason why we really don't sit on stories. We run them as soon as they're ready. I mean, I know people had a lot of questions about why these stories about Trump Jr. kind of kept happening day after day with sort of one new big piece of information, and that was a big part of it, was because we kept sort of getting that information into publishable form and obviously didn't want to sit on it. It was a huge story. So it's just, it's kind of a lot of those factors.
So I'm a lawyer here in DC, which is no surprise for probably most of the audiences. But I represent spies and I represent journalists all the time. I worked with the New York Times many times on a number of cases, including when your reporters have been gone after. And the Times is willing to receive and publish classified information when it deems appropriate and does the right thing in talking to the U.S. government beforehand to see what the harm might be, if they could be persuaded. And Reality Winner is being prosecuted right now under the Espionage Act for allegedly leaking a classified document to The Intercept. And yesterday, I think it was announced, The Intercept and its parent company are providing legal funds and a defense fund for her, and have said that the government, that this is, trying to think how they worded it, that the government should not be prosecuting anyone under any journalistic source under the Espionage Act, and that this prosecution is nothing but an attempt to chill the media. And I won't give my views on any of the particular substance of that, especially since I used to represent one of the reporters at The Intercept who wrote the story. But I'd be curious on the panel's view on that view from The Intercept about that the government shouldn't go after someone who allegedly leaks illegally classified information. Not asking, but if you want to comment on the role of newspapers in publishing classified information, please, by all means. But the question is more about the government dealing with your sources who might be giving you classified information rather than what you might do with it.
Your question is, your question is, The Intercept is saying the government should not prosecute someone for illegally leaking information?
If they're a media source, yes.
From a media source?
As being a media source, that because they were, if she was their source, and there's separate issues about whether they screwed up in helping reveal her, but I should have pulled it back up. I could read you what the quote of the editor-in-chief said. But the essence was, journalistic sources should not be prosecuted under the Espionage Act for illegally leaking classified information because that information became journalistic by them publishing it.
Yeah.
And then you can get into whether whistleblowing or not.
But that's been a long argument, hasn't it, about whether the Espionage Act should be used to go after leakers. I mean, I don't know that we have time to comment on that. I mean, I am not a lawyer. But I know certainly governments right through Obama, as you said, have used that law to prosecute people. But I'm not quite getting the distinction between why they feel she should not be prosecuted.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was necessarily because under the Espionage Act, although that was what she used in the editor-in-chief's quote. But I think the essence was, forget Espionage Act, journalistic sources should not be prosecuted, period, notwithstanding the fact that it might have been classified information that was given to the media.
Yeah, well, that makes no sense. Yeah.
That's where I'm looking from.
That makes no sense to me. In other words, if it's a leak of classified information, sources and methods or whatever, and I'm the first to grant that things get overclassified, but if it's a leak of information which is legitimately classified, why shouldn't they be prosecuted?
I know you would feel that way. I'm curious if any of the Times panelists.
Yeah, well, you put the penny in, and it came out. I guess, yeah, I don't understand. In other words, if someone has leaked legitimately classified information, I can't understand why they wouldn't be prosecuted. And they're not always prosecuted, as you know. It's been somewhat selective in recent years.
I'm just not conversant enough with legal issues.
There is an overclassification problem. I think it's sort of a case-by-case basis as to, I'm not a big fan of blanket statements. I would say that journalism is not a crime, and that's not what we're out here doing. And I know that that's not, and she was not the journalist in this scenario, but I just think that's something that's important to remember.
Yeah, well, the crime would be on the part of the person leaking classified information. But to ask me whether they should be prosecuted is a little bit like, is the Pope Catholic kind of thing. I can't understand how I would come out any other way. Unless there's a hush fell over the audience.
Next question.
This is probably for Glenn mostly. First, is it, Mr. Priebus, is it rinse or rinse? I'm curious.
You know,
Rinse?
I thought it was rights.
I think it's Ryan's.
So Reince Priebus in February said that there should be no anonymous sources, period. His quote, if people aren't willing to put a name next to a quote, then the quote shouldn't be listed. Joe, Matt, and Adam on Saturday, Sunday, and Tuesday.
Where are you, by the way?
Back here.
Oh, sorry about
Back here. When you broke the, I guess it's junior gate, meeting gate, whatever we're going to call it now, Joe, Matt, and Adam had 3 White House sources for the core story there. Politico, for an article yesterday, had 6 sources from inside the White House. It was titled, White House Aides Feeling Helpless as Trump Jr.'s Scandal Explodes. How do you get 6 sources from inside the White House when the chief of staff is railing against what's going on over there?
Why, that's a good question. I will say this. I have done reporting, and I can determine that the chief of staff may, on occasion, have been the source for other reporters, not myself, I would say, at other publications. Just saying that, that of course is nonsense, and and when the president spend so much time talking with other people. I guess, was it the Washington Post that did this about a couple of months ago, where they had like 79 sources on a story? It was like, and we can classify them with code. We'll give each one of them code name.
Well, there's this, this sort of sourcing arms race going on, and I'm not quite sure why this got started, but to say this, they do this. This account is based on 30 people. Every account is based on 30 people. I mean, even if it just says according to 2 people, those 2 people are sort of, the ones who are willing to, allow them to be the publishable sources. What goes into a story is not just the people you talk to that day, but the background you've gathered, the expertise you've gathered, and people who are just unwilling to be published saying it or quoted saying it. So it's just it's a little
and the key
silly.
is also obviously the quality. It's about quality and not quantity. Look, there are stories. My former colleague Mike Allen was famous for these stories where it was like, call every senator and ask them the same question, right? And then you could do 46, right? And there's this, when you increase the subset, you get potentially a more accurate result. But in a place like the Trump White House, once you get past the 5 or 6 people, people often don't know what the hell's going on. It's not that uncommon for you to call somebody, or somebody to call you a source to ask you what's going on.
I would say that's true of any good reporter. I mean, a good reporter is sort of a part and parcel of the information flow. I mean, on any beat, truly.
Right. And again, the key is like, I don't know if it's entirely possible that their 6 were better than our 3, but it just sort of I think I do agree about the arms race stuff, but it is a hard decision to make, because you want to have some transparency about this and let readers know that you actually did your homework. The problem, of course, is when they're sort of they're blind sources. You never really are able to discern the quality. Only history will tell whether or not the story was right.
Hi, I guess this is another question for Glenn and Amy, sorry. So how do you guys go about building a network of sources when you move to Washington, D.C., or a new administration joins in and, it's all new people?
I'm not telling you that. I mean, what do you guys pay for this? Like, you have to pay a hell of a lot more to get that stuff. Look, I think... First of all, when you've been here a while, you get to know people. I've known Sean Spicer, unfortunately, for 10 or 12 years. I actually like him a lot, personally. I've known him for a very, very long time. In fact, the funny part about this is, back at my old place, I used to be the Sean whisperer. I would mediate between Sean and other reporters who Sean wouldn't talk to. But I think you have relationships. I've been doing this a long time, and the truth of the matter is, we read the same stuff, we talk about the same stuff, we swim in the same contaminated fish tank, as our sources. So swamp. I actually don't. You can't swim in a swamp. You can just crawl around. I like swimming. And it gets to the liquid component of our job too. Look, I think in general you have relationships with people, and again, Donald Trump is a change agent. He comes from a different place. He has a different approach. But in order for him to run this government, he has to have the connective tissue, and a lot of those people, those are folks that we've known for a long time. I covered. In 2016, I spent most of my time covering the next president of the United States, Hillary Clinton. And so having to make that course correction in early November was somewhat difficult. But, we know a lot of people. We've been around, and, being old has some benefit.
I have two questions relating to journalists. Given Trump's attacks on media in general and freedom of speech, have journalists, has there been a change recently where there's perhaps more communication, more banding together of different journalists to try to cope with the insanity that we are experiencing? And the other part of my question is, I'd like to hear from all of you what you want the public to do to help you in your jobs.
I mean, I would say that it's been an intense couple of years. There's sort of people tend to date it to November, but for those of us who were sort of deeply involved in the campaign, this was just really historic, and not just because of the president at all. You had a huge Republican field. You had, the first female nominee, so on and so forth. So we perhaps learned to cope a while ago, and it's more coping with just working a lot. I mean, it's frankly being this close, having this front row seat to history is exciting, and that is something that keeps us going. As far as what you can do for us, I mean, I think that thank you, first of all, I appreciate that. Subscribe. And really just something that just on a personal note, something that really saddens me is the growing, the broad distrust in the media and in just the sort of ever elusive nature of the truth. And that's sort of the only way we can kind of come together and debate what we should be as a country and as a human race is if we agree on a set of facts. And that's something that's, I think, really important. So, whatever you can do to promote whatever, source of truth you think exists, that is important to do.
So the panel mentioned at the beginning that the internet's changed the way that the media does business. I wonder if you have some thoughts on how the rise of partisan, sort of subjective news outlets has changed, how that affects how you do business, Fox News and Breitbart and other sources like that.
Well, look, it's funny that, the Trump administration talks incessantly about collusion with the liberal media and their enemies. Donald Trump consults on a regular basis with Rupert Murdoch. Sean Hannity, who has tweeted negative things about Maggie and myself, and we've written about this, consults with the president and gives him specific communications advice, including, we've reported recently, about cracking down on in-house media in the White House. There have been elements, Breitbart News, for a very significant component of the campaign, was pushing Steve Bannon's ideas on any number of subjects. The Daily Caller, the entire homepage of the Daily Caller for the last month of the election was nothing but WikiLeaks. The level of sort of discipline and focus on that side of the ledger in support of Donald Trump during the campaign in the early part of his presidency was impressive. And it is a free country, and these guys can do whatever they want to do. I feel that the problem is to dichotomize this, that they're on one end of this and we're on the other end of this. No, we are doing it. I believe that our function is fundamentally different. I am not disturbed. The way that I do my job is not in any way altered by the proliferation of those outlets. They can do what they want to do. And frankly, Bannon has called us the opposition party. Trump has called us the enemy. They can say whatever the heck they want. That is not going to change the way that we do this. I've been doing this since I'm 19 years old. I know what I'm doing. I want to find out what's going on. When I talk with people, Democrat, Republican, independent, foreign, domestic, I just want to find out what the hell is going on and then write a story about it. So this forever war that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump want to wage, that is a political decision that they have made, and God bless them. Let them do it. Let them do whatever they want.
I'd comment on this and the previous question, and that is, there was a lengthy article on General Lattis, Secretary of Defense, in the Atlantic, in the New Yorker several issues ago. It was a very interesting profile. And at the conclusion of it, he was asked, so often when people like this are interviewed, they're asked, what keeps you up at night? And often the answer is nuclear, cyber, North Korea, or whatever. His answer, which I thought was fascinating, was the disunity in the American people. And I think anything that serves, in a sense, to be, and I don't want to say destabilizing, but is so decisive, so divisive, I think is unfortunate. The mistrust of government, which has gone on now for some years, you can go back to the Vietnam War, you can go back to Watergate, whatever, but the growing mistrust of government, and now the media, is not healthy, I don't think, for our democracy. I think we were designed to be an open society, we were designed to have open debate, and we were designed not to be people aligned against one another. And I think that's what's unfortunate about what's going on.
I couldn't agree more with your remarks. And while I appreciate that the liberal media feels they're doing good work and telling the truth, I don't think it's enough. I mean, we're talking to each other, and there's a whole segment of the United States, the Trumpites I call them, they're not mostly around here, that don't believe anything they're told and can't relate to these stories. And to say that's their problem isn't an answer. I don't know what the answer is, but take the current stories about the Russian meddling in the election, for example. The answer on the other side is, oh, so what? The CIA does the same thing. I don't know whether that's true or not, quite frankly, but it's just dismissed, or he's a rookie, didn't know what he was doing. I think we need to somehow try to break through that wall that's just not listening to us. I don't know how to do it, but I think not to try is a mistake.
Oh, no. I think I just want to clarify one thing. I wasn't saying, I was talking about sort of conservative media. I wasn't talking about the potential readers. I agree with you 100%. And I think one of the great frustrations, and it hasn't just happened in the past year, it's been evolving this way for a long time, is the segment. I mean, what do we want to do when we write stories? We want to persuade people. I mean, we do. We want to present either a piece of information or a subset of information that's going to change the way that people view the world so that they can make better decisions, presumably in the voting booth, but elsewhere as well, right? Our capacity, and you hear this when you talk with pollsters doing focus groups, they'll tell you the same thing. The spit of land occupied by the quote-unquote persuadables is getting smaller and smaller. It's getting squeezed on either side. That, to me, is an incredibly dangerous development because people's minds are closing. And as long as preaching to the choir is no fun. And it's not why I think a lot of us got into this business. And I think your point is very well taken, and it is very, very difficult to figure out how to change people's minds on things.
I think we have time for one more question. We have one, down front.
Yes, on the way here, my husband read a New Yorker article about the Inquirer, and the publisher of the Inquirer, and how he kind of controlled his what he did and the effect on the election, because he didn't report any negative stuff about Trump and every piddly little thing he could about Clinton. And there's some place, I think this other woman back here was kind of saying that too, is like, I don't know, maybe the thing we need to do is come up with some rag to put in the grocery stores that'll end up, have Angelina Jolie on the cover and end up having more short, factual articles in them that Inquirer readers might read.
That's what people in Trump land are out there reading.
I'll buy it.
What can you do with that? Yeah. Go for that, Fiscus. won't you?
I don't think any of us have the answer to this. I mean, obviously, there's and there are certainly perfectly legitimate complaints about the way the quote unquote mainstream media does things too, and I just and it's really hard to get people to sort of see the bigger picture and what we're losing on a on sort of a daily basis, and what's eroding by not talking to each other. So, talk to your neighbors, find out what they're about. That's about all I can say. And I just wanted to, on that sort of sobering note, I wanted to thank all of you for coming out, and thank you to the Spy Museum for having us, and thank you to Peter and Runa and Glenn.
And Amy.